Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Tiki MUGS with Ray, and I am with my friend Stephen Curran. We are in Gig Harbor, and we are in Stephen's home tiki barn. What is the name of your tiki
The
barn?
Rocking Jellyfish Lounge.
But there's another part to that.
Yeah, in what we call Twawal Cut.
Twala Cut.
Although the estuary here in Gig Harbor, Washington, it's named. Recently, they've tried to make it more sound like the native authentic name.
Yeah.
So I will massacre it, but it's Twawalcuth. Something like that. There are native people watching this.
I thought
laughing at us.
I thought the Twala Cut sounds pretty good. But there is a reason why your bar is named that. And can you explain to the audience why? Why? What are you going? What's that mean?
What we're going for, not just in our home bar, but in our house, is some elements of art that cross the Pacific, the Pan-Pacific art. And one of the important things is the Pacific Northwest. And we're in the Pacific Northwest, and we like to represent that.
Yes.
A lot of the art that we have from native sources are totem. So,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about tikis, and there's some controversy about tikis, what they are, and how people use them and utilize them. But there's also, native art from all over the Pacific and Papua New Guinea. We have pieces that were done by native peoples there. And just north of here is the home of totem poles.
Yes. Is it really?
Sure. Totem poles are a very specified certain First Nations or indigenous people or tribes in the Pacific Northwest, from the northern tip of Washington State up to South Alaska. Yeah. And a lot of them are concentrated today. A lot of the great carvers are concentrated in and around this area, south of Seattle, up north. But the indigenous peoples are mainly located on Vancouver Island and in British Columbia, but also in Alaska and a tiny bit in the state of Washington. And many of the artists have live in different places. But so there's a great carver who lives not far from here in Port Orchard, Washington, who I've gotten to know, who does terrific native art as well.
Yeah, and actually the city of Seattle is named after Chief Sealth.
That's right.
And I think his grave is outside of Squim.
Is it?
I think so. I visited. It's really nice, and there's a very large of Native American culture that goes on in the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
And you're right. There is a lot of totem poles around, especially up in the peninsula, up in Vancouver, and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. It's sort of like when I first got into tiki, just as like a sleight of hand or like a Freudian slip, would be like, oh totems, because it's a hand carved piece of art. Mm-hmm. But what exactly what is it, like a totem pole though?
So a totem pole, it's not a religious object per se. So let's. It is usually representations of animals, but it tells either a story or represents a family history, like a family crest, a family album. It commemorates events. It has a spiritual element to it in that when a totem pole is revealed to the world by the artist, usually there's a potlatch, which is a very important native ceremony.
A what?
A potlatch.
What's that?
It's a ceremony. It's a get together, a huge get together, usually of multiple peoples, extended families and whatnot. Okay. It can be in commemoration of many family events. Yeah. So whether you take your bar and bat mitzvahs, or you take your wedding ceremonies, you take your spiritual ceremonies, your get-togethers. So it's an important way that families and First Nations or tribes will get together and celebrate, and it has some spiritual and certainly communal aspects to it. And so oftentimes an artist will reveal the carving at that potlatch, and also then tell the story behind it, or the story will be revealed. But
So the story is told out through the totem pole?
it can be told through the totem pole, or the totem pole could represent. We're going to talk about at the end of this video. We're going to go through a totem pole that tells both a tribal identity and also maybe telling a story from 1700.
Oh wow!
And it's fascinating, and it also represents a person, a real life chief, and his family who commissioned this pole that we're going to talk about. So it has a lot of meaning to a lot of people, and we're privileged to have it. So it's, but again, to represent that art is just something that it's an honor to do, and we're on the land of the Puyallup people, and so they were important here where we are outside of Tacoma, Washington.
And actually, speaking of Tacoma, Washington, actually there is a movie. It was a silent film that was at the beginning of the century called "The Eyes of the Totem," that was filmed in Tacoma, Washington.
Okay.
And the main thing is a lot of the plot of this story centers around a totem that was literally a block away from Tacoma Cabana. And it's still there. Well, the movie, it was more centered.
Yeah.
But the totem that's in this movie is still literally 2 blocks away from Tacoma Cabana.
Yeah, the one downtown Tacoma. And that one's got a colorful history and a bit of a controversial history because it at one time claimed to be the tallest totem pole in the world, but at the same time, I don't know that it was done necessarily by native carvers or carvers. There are carvers who are not native, but who have grown up in the tradition and were taken in by the natives, like a friend of mine who's a carver here, a master carver for over 50 years. So it wasn't part of that. And this far south of Seattle, the indigenous people were not carvers. They did do carvings, don't get me wrong, but not of totem poles. That's a little further north. So there gets to be a lot of interest about whether that was the tallest, whether it was the authentic pole. It's an interesting pole.
There was a very large totem pole that used to be in Pioneer Square.
Yep. That
was in Seattle for a long time. There's one still that's remaining, but it's not as big. And the funny thing is I was part of a scooter club. My club was called the Hooligans, and we
love it.
And love it. and the president of my club, Tom, he got really interested in the Pacific Northwest totems, and he did all this research. And we actually did a scooter ride where we went to several totems around Seattle. So, and there's several of them, and they're beautiful. And if anyone has any interest in totem poles in the Pacific Northwest, and if you want me to show you to them, I will take you around. I will show you where they are. If you ever want to come up, I'll show you where they're at. Normally, we talk about tiki mugs on this series. Yeah. But today we're going to talk about, I guess what would you call them, totem mugs?
Well, these are, I don't know what you call them. I mean, certainly one is a tiki-ish mug.
Yeah.
The others are just pottery. The mugs are not authentic like the artwork we're going to discuss, and so they can be a little problematic, but they also can be fun at the same time and represent a different era. And so they're just, I guess, representative in a loose sort of way, and they're a bit kitschy. And especially when we get to the shameful one, I think that's kind of fun. I realize there might be a little controversy attendant to it, but I think we can relax and enjoy the mugs, I hope.
But when you decided to create your tiki bar, you wanted to definitely add an element of the Pacific Northwest. And you actually have on your wall, right over there, what would you call that?
So that's a moon mask.
A moon mask. What's a moon mask?
It's there's both the carver who does this and some other native carvers have created both sun and moon masks, one day and night. And so this would be a raven mask, and again representing the raven. And I'm not as conversant with the story of it. This is a modern mask by an artist named Patrick Amos. So we have a segregated area where we're just going to, as we collect Pacific Northwest and Canadian native art and just we sort of segregate that area just for that. And again, the idea is Pan Pacific. We from PNG to the PNW.
Want to support the Tiki with Ray show and look cool doing it at the same time? Then head over to tikiwithray.com and buy yourself a Tiki with Ray shirt. They're only $20. Tony Canepa did the design, and they're screen printed in America. Let's talk about some of the mugs that you have here. So, where do you want to start?
So we'll start over here. This mug, I don't even remember where or how I picked it up. I don't think it's very representational, or it's a bit kitschy, but it's just a goofy-looking representation from a tiki mug.
I see.
Yeah, that I'm not even sure who made it, but it was just something I picked up years ago along the way.
It's cool.
The source remains lost to time. Yeah, it's cool.
If there's anyone out here who knows who would have made this mug, let me know in the comment section below.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a way to discern that.
No, but it's really cool, though.
Yeah.
But the thing, well, I will say this, though. Living up here in the Pacific Northwest, it's not too hard to find totem poles. Like, for example, like this guy right here. I mean, they're not too hard to find. And you can get them various sizes. And obviously, when we go upstairs, we're going to go from this size to...
yeah, and you know, again, these are not native pieces, the pottery, but this little piece is just a native carved piece. And, you know, again, to discern what is real and what isn't, you know, and just let people know. These are not mugs, and they're all supposed to stack them one on top of the other, but they don't fit very well, so I don't want to have a minor disaster in my hands. But these are just coffee cups.
Oh, man, look at that.
And they're all stacked up. What's interesting about these, again, not in terms of authenticity, but what makes it interesting is they're from Blaisdell Pottery here in Port Orchard, done in the 1960s. Well, Port Orchard's
these are from
just
the
up the road. Yeah, I believe these are. Maybe 70s, but yeah. It's a pottery, and they if you read the bottom, it's a little hard in this light, but it says Port Orchard, Washington in the bottom. So these are just from up the road.
Totem Pottery, Port Orchard, Washington.
So
these are really cool.
Yeah. So
where did you find these at?
Online some years ago. They're just something I've had around for a few years.
And this is a tiki mug.
Yeah, it's very
from the Shameful Tiki Room, which is up in Vancouver, BC. And it's definitely a tiki, but
the best part's the beaver.
He's holding on to a beaver. And again, not really like indigenous by any means, but but definitely. But I mean, so if we're talking about tiki bars up in the Pacific Northwest,
what a great
this
bar.
is, I don't know, this to me, this mug shows the spirit of the Pacific Northwest, or at least like Vancouver.
Well, I mean, for me, it's important. I mean, my late mother was born and died a Canadian citizen, and so the beaver, being the national animal of Canada, represents Canada. So that's what it screams to me, and so I really appreciate it for that. Yeah, and what a great bar, though.
Yeah,
great bar.
Can't wait to get back.
Yeah, best painkillers Heidi and I have ever had.
So let's go upstairs.
Yeah.
And show the people that are watching the show what's in your living room.
You got it.
All right, let's do it.
This pole dates from 1988 and was carved by Calvin Hunt. He is a carver and is from the Kwakwaka'wakw people of the First Nations on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And he carved it for another Chief Norman Frank of the Comox people, also on that island. And we're going to talk about the chief and his people. And it also tells a story, as I said, dating back to 1700. The pole at the top shows a thunderbird, which you see on a lot of poles, and even replica and fake poles and non-native poles. But it's an important symbol. The orca, also known as the killer whale, which is of importance here in the Pacific Northwest, here in Puget Sound and waters further north. The chief himself, And then one of the food staples, a cod fish, is represented at the bottom. By the way, when we talk about top and bottom man on the totem pole is a myth. The relative importance of the objects doesn't necessarily depend on being on top or bottom. Instead, this totem pole, to me, both tells a story and has importance to the people. So Chief Norman Frank, for whom this was commissioned, was, as I said, the Comox First Nation, and I believe he was part of the Puntledge tribe. Their symbol is the Thunderbird and the orca together. And what you see here is the family herald and the chief himself. And also, one could say that he's bearing the brunt and thoughts of his tribal peoples on his shoulder, or in this case, literally on his head. What's interesting about this is some anthropologists and First Nation people in Canada did some research in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1700, before European settlers had first made contact with the Pacific Northwest native people, it appears there was a great tsunami that killed a lot of people. And it is possible that the story of the Thunderbird and orca tells that story. And the story is the Thunderbird, the great bird from the sky that creates thunder, and the orca were having a cataclysmic fight, these two giant animals. And in some tellings, the Thunderbird is the good guy, and some the orca is the good guy. But the idea being is that the orca, through its weight, either dragged the Thunderbird into the sea, or that the Thunderbird let loose the orca, which created a big, huge tsunami. And it is said that this could be a way of telling that story of the great tsunami of 1700. So not only does this represent some of the native peoples and their families, but also could be a retelling of the story through oral tradition and mythology of the great Thunderbird orca that led to cataclysmic events that shaped the environment of the Pacific Northwest. But Calvin, who I hope when COVID is done, I can go up and meet him. I've made contact with him, who carved this, should be very proud of this. I've had other people familiar with the art look at this, and they're as impressed with this as I. We're just privileged to have it. We think it's a wonderful pole, and it has a place of meeting in our house, and someday when we leave this house, we'll give it back to those tribal people. But for now, it's just a great source of enjoyment.